What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast. I am your host, Raymond Summerlin, here today, as we are every single Monday at 4 Eastern over on YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis on YouTube. Go and subscribe, get notified when we go live. Like I said, as we do every week, 4 Eastern on Monday, to discuss the waiver wire, to discuss injuries, to discuss all of the most important stuff heading coming out of an NFL weekend. And if we're doing that, there's only one person to do that with, and that is Tucker Bagley. How are you doing, Tucker?
Doing great, Ray. I mean, just a busy week of injuries. We have quarterbacks going down. We have running backs going down. We have wide receivers going down, offensive linemen, defensive linemen. I mean, and as we head toward the fantasy football playoff season, in these next couple weeks, it's going to be interesting. Going to be a busy time at the bye week. I mean, Patrick Taylor, all of a sudden, may be the savior for some teams on the fringe of their playoff roster, but right now it's a lot of teams, I think, in the actual NFL looking forward to the postseason. There's some guys who are going to be big question marks as we enter January in the new year.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it was kind of like a big week for, I think, kind of more real injuries than it might be for fantasy injuries. Like we can talk about Bucky Irving, for instance, which that's obviously a big thing if you're going to miss him. But there's also not, when you go onto the waiver wire, like how Rashad White's on the wire, how excited you're going to be about like Sean Tucker or something like that. With Jonathan Brooks and his ACL, obviously you are, I don't want to say excited because it's, we'll talk about Brooks, right? So we're not, obviously it's a terrible injury for a young player that, we're excited about, seems talented, and we'd like to keep going. But it is still kind of one of those situations where Chuba Hubbard was already on rosters, and that's not changing anything. If you had Chuba Hubbard, and you rode him through the first 10 weeks, and you're going to end the playoffs, that's going to end up being good for you. But there's no kind of like fantasy decisions to make out of it, and so it was kind of an odd week from kind of that perspective. Derek Carr, we weren't particularly excited about anybody on that Saints offense. We're certainly not excited about them now. So it is kind of a big deal for that Saints offense. But from a fantasy perspective, maybe you get less out of Alvin Kamara. Maybe that hurts, especially since Kamara was a value pick this year. But like from a waiver wire perspective, what are we doing? So it is an interesting week.
Yeah, just like you said, in general, it's it becomes a weird kind of strategy now as we move forward, because you mentioned some of the guys that we have, they already have sort of their natural handcuff, or they already have their natural replacement on their roster. And from a fantasy perspective, people like Chuba Hubbard or people like Rashad White are already going to be on rosters. It's not necessarily much you can pivot to, but then you look at something like what happened in San Francisco, and maybe there's a glimmer of hope out there if you're desperate for a running back.
Yeah, maybe it's there. We we maybe we get a little bit lucky with a Patrick Taylor, but then we see like right before we come on to record, and my mic decides to act weird for some reason, which is a bit of the confusion in my voice. Right before we come on to record, we see that Isaac Guerendo, even though they're on a short week and even though they're playing the Rams, it seems like on the short week, it seems like maybe he'll be back. So yeah, it's a weird week. It's an interesting. I guess we should just get right into it. Let's get started with Bucky Irving, who is it's an interesting situation with Bucky Irving. He was questionable for this week's game, but it was because of a hip. Then he ends up picking up a back injury. It doesn't play very much after that. It kind of is one of those, like, he was on the sideline, but he very clearly like wasn't going back into the game. So it's an interesting situation here with Bucky Irving.
Yeah, because I just think we're kind of in a wait and see mode, and that's sort of what Tampa Bay has said, right? He's dealing with back tightness, and he could play in Week 15 if his back loosens up, or if it doesn't, he won't. And there isn't necessarily a concrete answer as to what it is moving forward. This is something that we're going to have to monitor throughout the week, and the back is something that as Tampa Bay kind of looks and hopes and prays that they can make it into the postseason. Kind of trying it with a back injury, whether that's back stiffness, some sort of strain in the back, not necessarily something you want to play around with or really test. So I would be surprised maybe if he plays this week. Maybe he goes out, maybe he gets a massage, maybe he goes sees a chiropractor, and all of a sudden by Thursday he's back on the field and he's practicing. But yeah, it's definitely something to really keep an eye on moving forward through this week.
And I think he said like they needed to they need it to loosen up, which is, first of all, welcome to middle age. I know you're not there yet, Bucky Irving, but the idea of
Get a
needing
firm
it to
mattress, you'll
loosen
be
up.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely get the firm mattress, lay on the ground. That's always one of my strategies. Lay on the ground, get your feet elevated. That'll clear it up. Take some ibuprofen. By hole 2, your back will be fine, and there'll there'll be no problems. I mentioned Sean Tucker. It was just the Rachaad White show on Sunday. Mostly Tucker did play 11 snaps. He had 3 carries, he had 2 targets. So there was something there for him. And then we did see that kind of the one game where any of these guys missed was when Rachaad White missed back, I believe it was in week 6, and Tucker lost his mind in that game. He really had a massive game. We kind of got excited, see, what could happen. Could this be kind of like a three-headed monster, a three-headed kind of committee? But even that was on 38% of the snaps. So he just kind of took advantage of a good opportunity. And we don't really have a great example of them, even with Bucky Irving maybe dealing with some injuries and stuff like that. We don't really have a great example of them going to Sean Tucker with a large snap share. So even if Bucky Irving sits out this game and you're only there with Rachaad White, I just think we're going to see a lot of Rachaad White with Tucker coming in for, let's say 15-20% of the snaps. And so then you're really hoping that he just gets the hot hand and he hits. And that's a really tough thing to trust in the fantasy playoffs, especially since, the teams in the fantasy playoffs are generally doing pretty well. And so you would expect you have better options. And so, I mean, I'll probably have Tucker in the waiver column just because, like, if you're in a deep league, if you really just need somebody to go and somebody to start, if you had been playing Bucky Irving and you just don't have another option, then that's that's certainly something where you could go and look at. But yeah, it is a situation with Tucker that you're really kind of like banking on, like hoping for the best.
Yeah, I mean, there's just isn't a ton of concrete evidence that he's going to get enough of the workload to really make a difference. I mean, their schedule's pretty easy the rest of the way out. They don't necessarily have a murderer's row of opponents. So in theory, you could say, well, if they're blowing teams out, maybe they're saving Rachaad White, maybe they're resting Bucky Irving, and then Sean Tucker kind of fills in. But certainly, it would feel like a weird situation to bank on a guy strictly because he's going to be getting garbage time touches.
Yeah, and best ball on call actually in the chat put they've got Dallas, Carolina, and New Orleans. That's actually weeks 16 through 18. This week they've got the Chargers, which also is not like a matchup you're running away from, but it's not as exciting as those other 3. So yeah, it is a really good matchup the rest of the way, which is why I kind of hope we get Bucky back. I was a big Bucky proponent before the season even started, obviously, and also on the waiver wire. So it'd be good for just my personal fantasy stance if we get Bucky back. But if we don't, I mean, if you were Rachaad White, if you were like a Rachaad White dynasty person, if you had just been riding the touchdowns because he had been scoring touchdowns, you might be in an interesting situation here with Bucky Irving, kind of depending on where they want to go. The other running back talk about obviously is Isaac Guerendo with the foot injury. It's ironic. We finally get our first, not our first, but we get one of our only opportunities here to unload the fab on a running back. We do it with Guerendo last week. It's going great. Everything looks perfect for Guerendo from a fantasy perspective. So luckily you did get the one start out of him because he did everything he needed to do in this game on Sunday for you from a fantasy perspective before he left. Then he picks up a foot injury. It seems like it's a foot sprain. Like I said at the top, we get news right before we go live here that maybe he's able to play this week, but I mean, with a foot sprain, Tucker, that seems unlikely to me with the game on Thursday. But kind of where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I think the Thursday game really complicates things for me because even after the game last night, there were reports that he said he was fine, that he didn't really feel it that bad, that he probably expects to play. And then Kyle Shanahan came out during his press conference today and said, well, we're going to have to, see in the next couple days as to where he's at and, where we expect him to be. And I just think it being on Thursday, that's such a quick turnaround. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be a long enough runway for him to get back and be healthy. Now, if he was playing on Sunday, if the 49ers had a game on Sunday, certainly I could see that being a possibility. But it being Thursday, I just think, I would be cautious and I would probably lean towards Patrick Taylor and a couple of the other guys starting and getting touches as he rests, and maybe he's back for week 16. Maybe it's just a 1 week absence if it really is that minor. But I don't know. I would be really weary, and I'm skeptical that he's able to come back from this in a matter of 3 days.
Yeah, it's just an odd one. This also isn't because of that uncertainty with Guerendo. This also isn't the same situation that we had last week. After and we got it during recording this podcast because, like I said at the top, we record this live at 4 p.m. Eastern every single Monday. And right at the end of the podcast last week, we ended up getting news that not only Christian McCaffrey was going to injured reserve, but that Jordan Mason was headed there as well. And so that's when the chalk turned to Guerendo, and we said rightly, or go spend all your fab on Guerendo, and it looked really good for like 3 quarters, and so that was great. This is not the same situation, both because they have now thrown that doubt into the world that maybe he plays this week. I mean, we've learned our lesson with McCaffrey, I guess, early in the season that we're not going to really trust the 49ers on that kind of stuff a lot, but it is there at least that maybe we do see Guerendo this week. And then we're also, I think, the leap of faith to who's going to be the main guy. There's a little bit more faith involved than there was last week. That said, I mean, Patrick Taylor is definitely the strongest back. Patrick Taylor is the one that's been active for this team. He played 20 snaps to 3 for Keyshawn Vaughn in the game on Sunday. He's gotten the work this season. He's been active. We saw him. I mentioned him last week. We saw him as kind of that secondary option to Guerendo whenever McCaffrey was out, and then Jordan Mason ended up, missing time. And so I feel pretty confident that if Guerendo's not out there, that it's going to be Patrick Taylor. This is a great matchup against the Rams, or 26 in yards per carry allowed to running backs. You're in a, you feel really good about this. You feel really good that, we see the 49ers continue to run a similar offense. We've seen fantasy success for really anybody that's been in that backfield this year, whether it was Jordan Mason, Guerendo this past week, or, even Patrick Taylor at the end of the game. And so there are lots of things pointing to that. I feel a lot better, obviously, about Patrick Taylor than I would about, Sean Tucker. And Taylor's certainly going to be the guy that I'm going to target on the waiver wire this week if I really need somebody. But there is at least some trepidation here, both because we're moving even further down the depth chart. I mean, Israel Abanikanda that they got off from the Jets practice squad, I guess, Jets draft pick for sure. And he's on their active roster, but he was inactive. I guess he is still there. Could he learn the playbook fast enough? He's the kind of guy that you would be interested in from like a physical tools standpoint, that you would be interested in a Kyle Shanahan offense. And so, yeah, there's just, it's an interesting thing. I will say, and I've been thinking about this, and as a longtime Elijah Mitchell supporter, who may have him on the IR in several dynasty leagues, it is interesting at the beginning of the year, they didn't hold him through final cuts and get him onto the IR where he could have come back. That they had put him on IR before final cuts, which means that he's out for the season. He's still out. There's no way for him to come back. Especially since when I looked at that injury, I never heard anything that injury was really like that bad. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be misremembering. This was the end of August, and many things have passed through my brain since then. But it is just like thinking about it. This would have been a great spot to have Elijah Mitchell, like even available as a possibility at the end of the season. So I don't know what that kind of situation was. Do you remember what his actual injury was?
I don't
Now
remember
I
what
can't
it
even remember.
was. It was
like
a
a
weird
hamstring
situation.
again?
His career is so odd because he ran for almost 1,000 yards as a rookie, and then they bring in, Christian McCaffrey, obviously, and kind of put him down. But yeah, it was just labeled as a hamstring injury, I think.
Yeah,
from
that's what I
what
thought.
I'm quickly reading. Yeah, he had a hamstring injury, returned to practice, and then he was placed on the IR. And it was reported that he suffered another hamstring injury that was more severe. So, I don't know, just kind of
maybe
weird
it was
that
a tear.
4 years into
Maybe it
the
was a
league,
tear.
he went from 980 yards to 500 to 300 to not even worth a roster spot for the first 48 hours of the season.
Yeah, it struck me as strange then. It definitely strikes me as strange now that they're down to Patrick Taylor. And all respect to Patrick Taylor. He's an NFL running back. That is much more than I will ever be. So all respect to him. But it is that whole thing at the time struck me as odd. And now it just popped into my head that, it's a strange thing. Either way, I'm going to be writing about Patrick Taylor. I'm going to be writing about Sean Tucker. I'll be writing about all of that over at Sharp Football Analysis, part of my waiver column. That is free because I wouldn't charge for any of my work. No, there's no reason for me to do that. However, there are much smarter people at Sharp Football Analysis. Most notably, Rich Rebar, who writes the worksheet previews of every single game, every single week. If you have a question about any player, you go into a worksheet preview. He has something written about that player. He previews every single fantasy relevant player every single week. That is part of our fantasy package. It's also part of our NFL Plus package, which if you get that, you also get access to Warren Sharp's betting recommendations. You can get all of that for 20% off using promo code Angles. Head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com and check that out. All right, let's move on to a sad situation, I would say, with rookie Jonathon Brooks. I mean, there's not really much to say about this, right? He tore the ACL in the same knee, and this is kind of where we are with him.
Yeah, it's sad, and I feel bad for the kid. But the way everything kind of worked out this year with him and the way the Panthers kind of handled it just seems weird to me because they obviously drafted him early in the draft this year. He was supposed to be the guy, and then they hold him out. He's still rehabbing from the injury he suffered late last season, in college. And then before he even comes back, they give Chuba Hubbard a contract extension, a big contract extension because he's been playing so well. And then when Jonathon Brooks was eligible to come back, he still sat out like 3 weeks. Like he was still practicing in full, I think, for 3 full weeks before they let him on the field. And then when he finally got on the field, he had 9 carries over 3 games. Like he wasn't even touching the ball when he was on the field. And I just wonder, their doctor, we're obviously not doctors, but I just wonder how much that knee actually healed the way they thought it was going to over the course of the last, 7 or 8 months since he, was in the team's building after they drafted him in April, because everything that they've done, every move they've made really since he joined their franchise after the draft kind of indicates that they weren't necessarily all that high on him, right? Like giving more money to Chuba Hubbard, not necessarily rushing him back on the field, being really cautious once he is on the field. And he didn't really have much success, but you can't judge a guy based on, a 9-touch output over 3 weeks. It's just, I don't know. It's a really odd situation to me. And it stinks for this kid because I was going to go back and basically, maybe he misses most of next year as well as he tries to rehab, and maybe they take it even more cautious. But just a really weird situation to me because it seemed like everything they did leading up until this point kind of made me feel like they didn't have a ton of confidence in him being healthy or him being successful with this team moving forward. And then when he suffers the same exact injury that he suffered 9 months ago or 10 months ago, whatever it was, I don't know. It just feels weird to me. It's just an odd situation.
Yeah, but like the other part of that is they think they did everything they could to make sure this didn't happen again, and then it happened again, right? And so like it is one of those things where they were, I think, as cautious as you could be with him, and here we kind of still are. And I'm more taking it of it's strange the Chuba Hubbard contract after spending this draft capital on Jonathon Brooks, especially given the state of the Panthers roster and kind of where they are. Although with how Bryce Young is playing, I think we're probably going to feel better about where this roster is if they can kind of keep that going. Although, again, they'll have questions to answer about Bryce Young as we get in the off season. So, lots of things kind of moving parts here, but I think they took it as cautiously as they could with him. And then we're kind of still in this spot. And it seems like it's just one of those, I mean, tough situations. And what are you going to end up, doing? You did everything you could and it still didn't go right. And, sometimes that's life. Hoping for the best for him. I loved watching him play in college, and I'm hopeful we get to see him kind of back in full force at some point. Like you said, probably not at the start of next year. I mean, this is, I believe, around the same time he suffered the injury last year as well, right? And so, it's a tough situation from a fantasy perspective. There's nothing really to take away from a waiver perspective. Chuba Hubbard is just on rosters as he rightfully should be. I would say if we're talking about fantasy schedules for the playoffs, the Bucks get the Cowboys, the Cardinals, and the Panthers get the Cowboys, the Cardinals, and the Bucks in the next 3 weeks. That is obviously a situation you want to be in if you have Chuba Hubbard on your roster. In the first 10 weeks, so without Jonathon Brooks, before Jonathon Brooks came back, Hubbard got 80% of the running back carries with an 11.6% target share. He was the running back 12 in fantasy points per game in half PPR league. I mean, wheels up again on Chuba Hubbard, especially with, as I mentioned, how Bryce Young is playing and this kind of offensive success that we have now in Carolina, that you're getting pretty excited about what we might see for Chuba Hubbard over these, next 3 most important weeks here of the fantasy football season.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't really have anything else on their depth chart. I mean, Chuba Hubbard was the only healthy running back they had after Jonathan Brooks went down. Because I believe the third string running back got injured on a kickoff return as well.
Blackshear got hurt, and Miles Sanders is on injured reserve. He is eligible to become. I can pull up our injured reserve tracker over at sharpfootballanalysis.com, and I can control F to find Miles Sanders, and we can see exactly when he's eligible to return. He's eligible to return week 16. So we have another week of him not being there. But I mean, Miles Sanders was getting 3 carries, 4 carries a
Yeah, I
game,
mean, he's
even when he was
if
healthy.
we're being honest, right? Like classic Penn State running back bum.
Unimaginable that you would say the Eagles love Penn State so much that they just keep recycling out Penn State running backs. They got one non-Penn State running back, and they decided they hated DeAndre Swift, and they had to get another. That's how your Eagles work.
I hated Miles Sanders when he was here too. Trust me, I had a nice little Twitter feud with Miles Sanders for a brief moment.
Miles Sanders, he's doing big things, and I don't even know if he's going to come back when he's eligible to return. It seemed like a kind of a bad injury that he suffered. I believe
that
was
an ankle injury.
Game.
Yeah, I think he was in the London game.
Something like that. So yeah, so it's going to be Chuba Hubbard for a while. Another guy that unfortunately I think has probably played his last snap this year, although this is not official. They have not ruled him out, but it seems like he's probably played his last snap, is Derek Carr. Came down odd on his hand, and it seems like the news isn't good, right?
Yeah, so he's actually also dealing with a concussion, according to Darren Rizzi, the head coach over there in New Orleans, and he considered him week to week. Now, every other report from Ian Rappaport, from every other major NFL reporter, has basically said he's done for the season, except for, the actual Saints head coach says he's week to week with a broken non-throwing hand and a concussion. So they've said they don't expect him to be on the IR. I'm not sure what they would gain by not putting him on the IR. I just, at this point, if he's going to miss at least 2 weeks, just shut him down for the season and avoid him playing, a couple meaningless football games at the end of the season. But you got to look at their offense and how much it has struggled. And Alvin Kamara has been the one constant all season. He's been the one guy who you can kind of count on, as everyone else has either been injured or they've struggled to produce. Marquez Valdes-Scantling didn't even score a 70-yard touchdown this week like he normally does. So that's certainly worrisome if you're holding Marquez Valdes-Scantling stock. But Alvin Kamara, like the 3 weeks that Derek Carr missed earlier in the year, in those 3 games, rushed for a total of 70 yards. He was pretty terrible. And for a guy who's basically built his entire fantasy, resume this year on just pure dominance of the touches in that backfield, as we kind of look forward to the playoffs and what he could offer, because I'm sure he's a lot of teams running back one right now. You kind of wonder what his value is going to be, in these next couple of weeks if Derek Carr's out.
Yeah, I have in Best Ball Mania over at Underdog. I have my advance rate on Alvin Kamara teams is really good, and I'm not looking forward to what the next few weeks as we get into kind of the playoffs here, each weekly kind of playoff thing in that contest. I'm not looking forward to what that's going to look like. To kind of put a bow on your point there from a fantasy perspective, Alvin Kamara was the running back 27 and half PPR per game scoring from week 6 through week 8 when Derek Carr missed time. He is the running back 3 in the other 11 weeks. Like, that's the type of fall off that we're looking at. Now, RB27 is still not bad, especially whenever you look at where you drafted him, and he had a 23.8% target share with Derek Carr off the field this season. So he is getting those targets. So especially in PPR leagues and half PPR leagues, you might get enough catches there that's fine. But you mentioned, I mean, the Saints offense without Derek Carr from week 6 through week 8, they were second to last with 0.92 points per drive, and they were 27th with 4.7 yards per play. It is a bottom tier offense. Jake Haener came into the game after Carr was injured against the Giants, so I'm assuming that he's going to be the guy. He took over for Rattler after Spencer Rattler it didn't really make a ton happen. He has averaged 6.1 yards per attempt with an awful 17.2% off target rate this year, albeit that's a very small sample size. He has 29 attempts, so it's a very small sample size. But yeah, everything about this is not good. I got excited about Juwan Johnson last week, and he ended up hitting for us with a touchdown as one of our Uncut Gems on the Thursday show with Rich. And so he ended up hitting for us. And so, that was good. But moving forward, are you trusting him in this passing game? You mentioned Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Are you going to trust him moving forward? To the point that you would ever trust Marquez Valdez-Scantling? Are you going to continue to do that with Haener? I just don't think you can. I think it's the Kamara show, and you're just hoping for the best. You're hoping that he gets enough catches, hoping maybe if there is a touchdown to be scored by this offense, it's by him, and we kind of move forward. You mentioned all of the injuries, and it is just wild. I wanted to kind of bring up, we remember that first game that they had. So Derek Carr threw 3 touchdown passes in that first game, and those touchdown passes went to Rashid Shaheed, who's out for the season. One of them went to Juwan Johnson, and one of them went to Foster Moreau, who are still there. Congratulations. But obviously, Chris Olave is now out for the season as well. And you just look at this, they've had all these injury issues on the offensive line, even though they are getting healthier there. They had all those injuries throughout the year. And we had those 2 weeks of the Saints with their new offensive coordinator. And we thought with Clint Kubiak, right? And we thought, oh, they finally found something. And then the bottom fell out, I think, faster and more violently than we could have ever expected it would. And now here we are heading into the final 4 weeks of the season, just well, can you trust anybody? It's just what a wild roller coaster ride for the Saints this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's much of a roller coaster as it is a free fall based on where they started. But yeah, I mean, it is crazy. They put up 47 and 44 the first 2 weeks, and they haven't looked anything like that team, whether that's from a scheme perspective. They've obviously dealt with a ton of injuries on that side of the ball and have never really been as healthy as they were early on in the season. But yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable to kind of just look at that roster and look at what that offense did in weeks 1 and 2 compared to what they did the rest of the year. I remember, the Eagles went down and beat them 15-12 in week 3. And everyone thought that, oh my God, what an unbelievable win for a team that was kind of desperate for a big statement victory. Now you look at it and go, I don't know if it's really that impressive based on everything else we've seen for them. I mean, they didn't win again until November after that game. It's just crazy how they kind of just free-falled.
Yeah, it's really, it's tough. And they started to, obviously they made some trades, traded Lattimore, but they are perpetually in cap
Has he
hell
played yet?
because of the did he play? No, because he was on bye this week, so he still hasn't played. So still haven't. But, the Commanders, they're gonna make the playoffs, so probably we'll see. Probably we'll say. And so they've got time for him. All right, let's talk about a few other guys that didn't get hurt this week, but that at this time last week maybe we weren't expecting them to miss. The first of that is George Pickens, which with his whole injury showing up late in the week, this is just it was a kind of tough fantasy situation here for Pickens, and it seems like this one's going to linger for a little while.
Yeah, so it was reported today that it's a grade 2 hamstring injury, which is usually, a hamstring injury more often than not, especially for a wide receiver, is a multi-week injury. The fact that it's a little bit more severe than just, your kind of average tightness, it would make me feel like not only is he going to miss this week, which has already been pretty much ruled out for this Sunday's game against the Eagles. Like you said, it kind of popped up late in the week last week, so it's already more of a short runway than it would be if he got hurt, in week 13, on Sunday in the actual game, as opposed to later on the week at practice. So he's been ruled out for week 15, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's ruled out for week 16 as well, based on the severity and what this has happened. Although Pittsburgh does play Baltimore, I think in week 16, which is probably their biggest game of the season. At least in the final, 3 weeks or whatever. So I'd imagine if he's 80% or if he's close to being ready to go, I can't imagine a bigger spot for him to return than that.
That is the one, if you're looking at kind of their fantasy playoffs and you're thinking about, okay, where could we get Pickens back from on a fantasy roster? That Ravens game is the one, because we know the Ravens have been susceptible to the passing games and to, into wide receivers for sure. This week, the Steelers are playing the Eagles. Like you said, it's almost like he's already been ruled out for that game. And I mean, you can speak to what the Eagles defense has been recently, but no matter what, we're not really that excited about playing anybody against the Eagles right now. The Eagles have allowed 6.7 yards per target to wide receivers this year, easily the best rate, and they've been better since their bye week. They've allowed 6.0 yards per target to tight ends, which is the 5th best. They're shutting people down. And so you look at the Steelers passing game without George Pickens, and we don't think George Pickens is going to play. And you think, is there anybody else I can go out there and, I can try to target, especially in deeper leagues, and see if I can play. And I mean, the answer to me feels like no. I mean, Van Jefferson ran the most routes this past week, but he got one target that happened to be a touchdown. So great, that hit. Calvin Austin, Scotty Miller, Mike Williams, they all ran around 50% of the routes on the dropbacks, and so like they're out there for about half of the dropbacks. That's not exciting, especially in this matchup. Pat Fryermuth continues to run about 75% of the routes. He continues to get targeted on about 15% of those routes. He happened to find the end zone, so that worked out. Is that going to continue, especially in this matchup? This whole Pittsburgh situation without George Pickens feels like a real clutching at straws kind of situation. And hopefully, if you're in the fantasy playoffs, you're in a better shape than having to clutch at those straws. I guess Fryermuth is the guy if you really are needy at tight end for whatever reason. You lost Dallas Goedert, for instance. Then Fryermuth is that guy. He's available in roughly like half of ESPN leagues, so he could be out there for you. But yeah, this whole situation isn't great. Now that said, maybe that switches if Pickens is still out against the Ravens in week 16, and we can maybe target that. If you play in week 17, I assume Pickens would be back by then, but they get the Bengals, assuming that the Steelers need to play in that game. They'll get the Bengals, and that's maybe something you target. But then, with Fryermuth against the Chiefs, that's a good spot for tight end. So maybe against the Chiefs, you're good with Fryermuth if Pickens isn't playing there. And so there are some opportunities here, but specifically for this week with the Eagles and kind of this defense and the way they're playing, this really feels like just an avoid situation as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think it's funny. You go and, if you go to CBS Sports and read their kind of little news update, I think they listed like 6 wide receivers or 6 receivers who could benefit from George Pickens being out. And that's just, like you said, like it's literally grasping at straws. You look at the target share and the way Russell Wilson kind of distributed the ball against the Browns on Sunday. He only completed 15 passes. That's all they needed to complete. But, I think 9 different guys got a target. No one had more than 40 receiving yards. So, I mean, it's an offense that's not necessarily built to be, an aerial assault on defenses. The Eagles defense has been really good against opposing wide receivers in recent weeks outside of, Adam Thielen and what he did yesterday. And Puka Nacua put up big numbers when they played a few weeks ago. But, yeah, I mean, this just kind of feels like a group right now that it's a lot of guys, and I don't really know if anyone's necessarily head and shoulders above the rest that you should be targeting on the waiver wire.
From a real football perspective, this is such an interesting 3 weeks here for the Steelers, with the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs. Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs is just really fascinating. The Chiefs, that could be that's a fascinating game. Chiefs and Steelers, 2 teams that just happen to just keep winning, and the Steelers have obviously been better at times for sure this year. But you do always get that vibe out of the Steelers that we're just kind of winning. The Chiefs, I mean. I think I tweeted yesterday, the Chiefs have better plot armor than an 80s action hero. Like, I have no idea how they continue to do this. And so, yeah, that's a fun game. Well, I hope the Chiefs still have something to play for in that one for sure. That will be an interesting kind of run for the Steelers. Talk to me a little bit about Breece Hall and where we are with him.
Yeah, I mean, Breece Hall obviously was inactive, was downgraded to out. I haven't really seen any updates outside of people maybe speculating that they should just sit him down for the rest of the year. He's dealing with, I think, a knee injury, right?
Yeah,
it's right there on the screen. I should be able to read that. But yeah, dealing with a knee injury. They don't really have anything to play for anymore. They've been eliminated from the postseason. You kind of look at how this injury has really been affecting him. Like, he's been on the injury report the last few weeks. He finally sat out on Sunday. So I don't know if they really feel like it's time to shut him down for the regular season. But I would bet that if this injury continues to linger through this week, maybe if he's still missing practice and if he's still questionable heading into the weekend, maybe if he misses week 15, they decide to just shut him down for the rest of the year and try to get him healthy. Because outside of that, there really hasn't been any update on his condition. And normally a coach who, is looking for anything positive, any sort of positive sentiment to give to his fan base, saying, hey, our star running back might be back this week is certainly a good place to start. So the fact that they haven't even done that doesn't necessarily make me the most optimistic that he's going to be ready or even 100% at any point the rest of the year.
Schefter did say they have, quote, no plans to shut Hall down, but obviously that could change with the injury and kind of where we end up here. I will say, the reports, and I mean, you can kind of be cynical about these reports, but the reports about Aaron Rodgers and what he apparently is playing through with like a slightly torn hamstring and a knee injury or something like that. Perhaps this is kind of one of those, your quarterback's fighting through it. The running back's going to fight through it. Two situations. I'm not sure. From a waiver perspective, I mean, at the end of last week, we saw Braelon Allen, picked up in a lot of leagues. I was a little bit hesitant about Braelon Allen. In fact, I mentioned this last week in the waiver column. This is before, Breece Hall had played and he had kind of missed more snaps than usual. And he hadn't looked exactly right. And we didn't know what was going to happen with him. And so I did not have Allen as an ad. That was a miss for sure. But I kind of wrote when I wrote about Allen, as I do kind of in like the secondary area of the waiver column, that it might not be the clear handcuff situation that it looked like earlier in the season. We had seen Isaiah Davis start to take on more of that work. I didn't play Braelon Allen at all in DFS. I was not particularly, interested in him from that perspective. And then we saw that play out, right? We saw that play out in this game. It was a pretty even split. Allen had 35 snaps, Davis had 33. Allen had 15 touches, Davis had 13. Allen had 5 targets, Davis had 6. Davis obviously ended up getting the touchdown. He played the only snap in a goal to go situation for the team, and so this was a clear split here, and so that's not great news for Allen. The other problem for Allen is that he just hasn't really been that effective as of late. Over the last 8 games, Braelon Allen is averaging just 3.8 yards per touch. That's like Ezekiel Elliott bad. Like that's the level that we're talking about. Over that same time period, Breece Hall's at 6 yards per touch. Davis is at 5.8 yards per touch for the season, albeit obviously on a very small sample size. And so you put all that together, and I do think that if Hall continues to sit, we are going to continue to see the split between Davis and Allen, which gives you a great opportunity to go and pick up Davis, especially since they get the Jaguars this week. This is certainly a defense that we want to attack. The Titans didn't score as many points as we were hoping, but there were a couple circumstances going on there. We still saw Tony Pollard have a good game against this Jaguars defense. And the thing about the Jaguars offense, when it's led by Mac Jones, is you're not going to expect them to put the Jets in a game script where they have to abandon the run. There probably going to be enough touches there for both of these guys. I probably will be interested in going back to Allen this week in DFS, depending on what happens to his price. Haven't looked at price yet. I do think there's an opportunity there if Allen wasn't added in your league, although I would assume in most competitive leagues he's already been added. But if he wasn't added, there's a chance there to use him this week because of the matchup, again, assuming Hall sits out. So there's a lot of things there, but this is not as clear of a handcuff situation as it looked like, after week 2 or 3. And that's disappointing because this is one of those situations where if it was clear that it was going to be Allen, if Allen was still playing at the level he was playing at early in the year, that we'd be really, really excited about where he is. And you just can't get there even with the matchup this week because of kind of what we've seen from him lately.
Yeah, I mean, he just maybe like 6 or 7 weeks ago, he was a pretty hot candidate on the waiver wire just because of how well he was playing. And, it's hard to find a handcuff like that. And now we've reached a point now, like you said, with Isaiah Davis, where they're splitting carries, pretty much a complete 50-50 split. And, this week they play Jacksonville, they should get ahead of. But after that, you kind of look ahead. If Breece Hall continues to sit, they have the Rams and then the Buffalo Bills the 2 weeks after that. So I don't know if it's necessarily a situation where they could find themselves either playing ahead or in a competitive enough situation to where they can keep running the ball. Maybe against the Rams, I think they're like 24th in yards per carry allowed this year. So certainly that could be a situation. If their defense holds up, they could be in a spot where they could continue to run the ball. But considering kind of where this offense is and where this team is, it's not necessarily a high enough ceiling on this offense or a high enough floor on this offense to where I get excited about a running back who's splitting, half the touches in an offense that right now just isn't putting up numbers and hasn't all season.
On the great game script point, I should say that the Jets have utilized running backs. They utilized Hall, they've utilized Allen, and now they're utilizing Davis in the passing game. So that is certainly part of it as well. That even if like against the Bills and the Rams, they find themselves behind. If those two guys are playing, you would expect them to get targets, which certainly helps. It's better if that's not the case and they're not chasing the game, and and the Jets are scoring points in a good situation. But it's not, they're not going to maybe completely fall out of it, which so that's at least promising. But yeah, it's not what we expected. The one thing we did expect, this one we definitely expected if Kenneth Walker was out, that Zach Charbonnet to step in and just be the guy and put up great numbers in a great matchup, and that's what he did. And so the question moving forward, there's no waiver wire play here because Charbonnet was already rostered in so many leagues before this. He definitely is now, even if he wasn't before. After the end of last week with Kenneth Walker, I would say somewhat surprising, sitting out this past week. But I guess just moving forward, do we know about Kenneth Walker when he's coming back? Kind of what's the deal here with Walker?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because in week 13, he had his normal workload. Like he played the full game. He didn't come out, didn't have any issues. And then he popped up on the injury report with calf and ankle injuries. Mike McDonald was asked about it. And he said, yeah, he suffered them during the game, but it didn't pop up until later. Like he felt fine on Sunday. And then on Monday, he came in sore, and that was kind of the impetus of it all. And then he was questionable heading into the weekend, then was downgraded to out on Saturday, but the Seahawks have maintained that he didn't suffer a setback or anything. That was just them, I don't know, maybe being nice, maybe removing the shroud of mystery by just immediately declaring him out, which you see teams do sometimes on Saturdays, depending on where a player's at. So it'll be interesting to kind of see where he is this week, because if it is something where he was truly questionable and it was an injury that he was able to play through 2 weeks ago without necessarily feeling anything, you would assume that it's relatively minor and it shouldn't lead to a lengthy absence.
We would hope so. But I will say, obviously that was a really important game against the Cardinals. So it obviously is a real injury. That's not like we're sitting this out, especially with how the NFC West is. And so, yeah, we'll just have to watch this week. Another injury we saw on Sunday night, we saw Justin Herbert pick up a leg injury. It didn't look great on the field to begin with, but then he played through it. And I think we think he's fine, right? Like that's kind of the overall takeaway here for Herbert.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he played through it, I think they're kind of desperate. Like, I don't know, it feels like a week where he'll be limited in practice. Maybe at the very least, he sits out Wednesday's practice before coming back. But yeah, I would be shocked if he isn't on the field. Maybe a little limited because he didn't necessarily look like himself in the second half of that game. But yeah, I would expect him to be out there this week.
You called it a contusion too, which that could be more pain management than anything else. So I'm expecting him to play. They're playing the Bucks. You're excited about that matchup, especially if we can get Ladd McConkey back. He seemed close. We went into last week, like this time last week with Ladd McConkey, where both of us were very pessimistic he would play. And then he got a limited practice in on Wednesday. And I have a Google sheet that I just keep notes every week about who's practicing and not. And I kind of put in on my Wednesday update of that. I go, okay, well, I guess he's playing. And then we get to Sunday night and he's, inactive. And so it was kind of an odd thing, but it definitely seemed like he was close. I assume McConkey is going to play this week. That would be my guess. Is that your guess as well?
Yeah, I think so. The one thing I thought was odd was a report on ESPN said he wore sweatpants during the week during his limited practices because he was limited in practice every day last week, which usually is a half decent sign that a guy could be ready to go. So maybe, like you said, that's indicative that he should be ready to go in week 15. But the other thing I thought was odd was they also reported that he never participated in individual drills, only team drills and walkthroughs, which is kind of odd. Because normally, if you're limited, it's the other way around. You participate in individual drills where things are a little bit more controlled. And then when it comes to team drills like 7-on-7s, you sit those out. So I found that to be a little strange that he only, participated in walkthroughs and didn't do anything in individual drills. So maybe that means he's a little bit more limited than we initially expected. But like you said, I think there's a fairly good chance that he's active this week.
Yeah, and maybe that's the shoulder part of it, right? Like that we just don't want him like catching passes or something, which that would be a concern. We've seen that with Keon Coleman, for instance, with kind of what's going on with him. We saw that with Amari Cooper, both Bills receivers, actually, when they had their wrist injury, is that they were getting in limited practice, but it was more like mental reps and they weren't able to do it. So yeah, certainly something to watch. The other injury from that passing game, and again, this is something to pay attention to because they are playing the Bucks this week and kind of what that could mean for this entire passing game. But Will Dissly left the game on Sunday night with a shoulder injury. Do we have any updates on him? Any news on him?
I haven't seen any news on him yet today. Like you said, he left. I think it was the end of the first half. Maybe the last play of the first half. He left with a shoulder injury and never returned. But like you said, I haven't seen Jim Harbaugh update anybody with his status for this week yet.
If you're digging on tight ends, Stone Smartt came in the second half, 80% route rate. He had 25% of the targets. So, you're excited about that. The Bucs have allowed the 5th most points to tight ends this season. The Bucs defense is incredibly banged up. We don't talk about defensive injuries here because we're talking about fantasy and the waiver wire. But if we did talk about defensive injuries, we'd be talking about Antoine Winfield and just another injury in that defense, in that linebacking core, in that secondary. Winfield's obviously in the secondary. I'm just saying they have injuries at linebacker, injuries in the secondary. They're crazy banged up. The Chargers are in a great spot this week if they can be healthy, if we can get Herbert back, if we can get McConkey back, and if we don't get Disley back, you're going to be interested, I think, in Stone Smartt, both in
Or Tucker
DFS
Fisk.
and even as a there you go, you have another Tucker, or even as a like, you just need a tight end, you're in a deeper league or whatever. Maybe you're someone who had to start Chigakongwo in a league this week. I think you're going to be interested in Stone Smartt. That is a very specific reference to my life and the tight end purgatory that I find myself in one league. With the rest of the team's good. We're just fighting for that tight end spot. So here we go. One more injury here. Actually, the guy who played the Bucs this past week, that is Aidan O'Connell, who the kind of path from where I seem to remember this happening to him last year as well. The path from what it looked like on the field to where we are now with Aidan O'Connell, things have gotten a lot better for him in the past 24 hours.
Yeah, the fact that he got carted off the field and got to do like the little complimentary like wave to the crowd.
With an air cast. He had an air cast on.
And yeah, by the way, it's a bone bruise and like he seems to be okay. Like it's not that big of a deal. It's certainly a big swing in the right direction if you're the Raiders and you're still trying to win, which maybe they're not, based on where they are as a franchise and where they are currently in the 2025 draft order. I think they're top 2 right now with the Giants. But yeah, it's just a bone bruise, like you said, with Justin Herbert earlier. That's more of a pain management thing. They play on Monday night, so he has an extra day to kind of rest up and heal up. So if he can't go, it'll be Desmond Ridder again. But I'd imagine there's a pretty good chance he's active.
I could be wrong about this, but I have this memory of Aidan O'Connell seemingly being very hurt last year and like going down the stairs somewhere into like in one of the stadiums. It might have been in Vegas. I think that's Allegiant Stadium in Vegas, right? It might have been there. Like I have this memory of him like going down with what seemed like this was going to be a season-ending injury. And then I don't know if he played later in the game or if he just played the next week, but for some reason I have this memory of Aidan O'Connell. This is going to be like an Aidan O'Connell thing for us. Or I've made that all up in my brain. I have been sick for about a week and I've been taking a lot of medicine, so it's certainly possible that this is all merely a fever dream. Who knows? That's it for the injuries here. I will have the waiver column, like I said, over at Sharp Football Analysis on Tuesday. You can go and check that out. I will say, like from a waiver perspective, we're focused on depth, not as much depth. We're focused on the starting lineup, focused on guys that can help us this week. But if you have roster spots open, you are looking for these kind of like high upside handcuffs. And I do want to point out, when I say handcuff here, I know normally that means for your own players. I don't think it necessarily needs to be that. You're just looking for like high upside guys. So guys like Tyler Algier, who's now low enough to be in my column on rosters. He has some standalone value on his own, but certainly if something happened to Bijan Robinson, we saw a couple years ago what Tyler Algier can do. We know how good of a running back he is. So he's out there. Trey Benson, the Cardinals have a great schedule over the next 3 weeks. If something were to happen to Connor, Trey Benson would be there. Cam Akers, Blake Corum, Ray Davis, Jalen Wright. If you go down a tier, Kendre Miller, Emmanuel Wilson, Damian Pierce. If you go down another tier, Tyler Goodson, Will Shipley, who's one of my kind of guys I'm looking at, who I think actually I'm interested in asking you about this. You would know more. I know that Kenneth Gainwell is getting more work now, but I'm of the opinion that if something happened to Saquon Barkley, that it would actually be more Will Shipley that we would see stepping into that role. Is that a wild opinion from the Philadelphia guy?
Little bit. I do think it's odd. I think last week, Saquon Barkley got a carry on the first play, and the very next play was a swing pass to Will Shipley. And the pass after that, I think, was to Aeneas Smith. Like, all of a sudden, they decided, hey, all our rookie day 3 picks should get a touch, and then they never touched the ball for the rest of the game. So
yeah,
it would be interesting. I do think he's somewhat of a weapon. Like, they have drawn up plays for him in the past. It's been kind of a very, very limited touch share for him because Saquon Barkley has dominated so much. But if something were to happen to him, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to draw up plays to get him the ball, because I think he does offer a little bit more than Kenneth Gainwell, who's really just, in my mind, a replacement level running back.
I think with Shipley, it's just that when we see them get to these fourth quarters and they take Saquon out in these fourth quarters that they're always leading at the end of, it is always Will Shipley. And I know that that's more about his spot on the depth chart as well, but it seems to always be Will Shipley getting those carries. And so that's my thought process. Either way, I went through that list. Like Benson, especially, is someone that's really high on my list. We haven't had our James Conner 4-game absence yet. It hasn't happened.
Running out of time.
It's not going to happen this year, obviously, because we only have 4 games left. But are we going to get any Conner absence? Benson with that schedule, he's a guy that I have, all stashed in a lot of places. But all those other guys too, Corum is certainly on that list. What we've seen from him, Ray Davis looks like a really talented guy in that Bills offense. Jalen Wright, we saw Devin Achane go to the Blue Medical tent this past week. Raheem Mostert wasn't playing because of his hip injury. Jalen Wright, we know what a really good speed guy could do in that offense, even though the running game just doesn't work anymore, which that's one of the lower, less talked about storylines so far of this season, is that the Dolphins just can't run the ball anymore, which is very interesting. But yeah, Jalen Wright's there. So lots of names out there. If you have an open roster spot, target those guys. It doesn't even have to be that you have Achane and you add Wright. Target these high upside guys. If something happens, you're not going to be spending fab dollars. You're just going to be putting them in off of your bench, and that could, win you a league. And so that's kind of the place to look. Any other handcuffs I missed, or do you want to talk about more day 3 Eagles picks? Aeneas Smith is back from injured reserve. We haven't seen Johnny Wilson in a while, though. I need Johnny
Got
Wilson
a couple
to get back in
targets.
my life.
Jalen Hurts overthrew him on a third down yesterday.
So
it's
he
hard
was back
to do.
this past
like
week.
6'8", no big deal.
He's so tall. He looks so. I love Johnny Wilson. Johnny Wilson was one of my.
It's jarring seeing him on the screen.
He is noticeably bigger than everybody else. So I really do like watching Johnny Wilson. If you ever just you just need some time, just wasting some time on a break at work, just look up Johnny Wilson Florida State highlights and have a good time. All right, that's it for us. On Wednesday, looking at all kind of the Wednesday practice. So make sure you check both of those out. Make sure you check out the worksheet previews from Rich Rebars. Those start getting posted on Tuesday. Again, part of that NFL Plus package, which if you subscribe to that, you also get Warren's betting recommendations, Warren Sharp's betting recommendations. So do that. Head over to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You can subscribe, get notified when we go live. Warren Sharp will be live on Tuesday. Rich and I will be live on Thursday. Warren will be live again on Friday. Lots of content over there. Go and check it out. We appreciate you supporting us, and we'll talk to you soon.